Well, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us on your 2022 Fire Safety Refresher Training. My name is Leon Lemoy. It's my privilege to be here as a fire safety representative for OPWDD to help you along with the training today. As you look at the screen, you can see our title for today, which is The New Normal. Back to basics. And a lot of people understandably can't stand that phrase, the new normal. But I think as we go through the training today, you'll begin to understand why it's such an important title and why back to basics plays into that so specifically. As we move forward through the training today, we're going to talk about some main topics. We're going to talk about where we are versus where we were not too long ago. Talk about some of the possible causes of why we find ourselves in the circumstances that we do, and talk about getting back to basics, because we're going to find that as we evaluate the new normal, getting back to basics is really going to help us out considerably. Where we are versus where we were. When we're talking about this, we can remember not too long ago, for those of you who have had the training before, that we talked about complacency and routines versus the new situations that we find ourselves in now. When we talked about complacency in the past, it really dealt with specifically being in the routine and not paying attention to the circumstances around us. Complacency is kind of operating on autopilot, and we found ourselves under those circumstances because for so long things stayed the same, or seemingly stayed the same. Now we find ourselves in new circumstances, new situations, and we'll talk about some of the reasons here shortly. What we're also finding is that recently our new challenges are causing problems with some of the things that we need to do and ensure that we need to do in order to be as fire safe as possible. One of the things that we're supposed to do on a regular basis is our drills, right? We know that our fire drills are conducted once per shift per quarter, which is something that works out to 3 fire drills per quarter in each one of our residences. And we rotate those through. We're finding that some of those aren't actually getting done. If we also look at our documentation, we're finding that some of our actual evacuations, right, those are those things where the alarm goes off and we didn't intend it to happen. Maybe it's somebody cooking in the kitchen and not paying attention to what they were doing and maybe burn some food and that sets the alarm off. That actual evacuation is where we leave the facility completely, but we need to document that. Many of you may not even know that you can do that right in the fire portal, just like we document our drills. Now we can actually go to the actual evacuation tab and put the information in. It's actually easier than filling out the old handwritten form or the old typed form. This one, you just click the boxes, add the information as needed, and press on from there. You know, in the middle of these new circumstances and situations that we find ourselves in, fires still happened. As a matter of fact, I had the privilege of being part of the emergency response for COVID, and I was working in Staten Island, great place to visit and see, and I was working at one of the testing sites, and I got a phone call one day. The call asked me to go to one of the locations that had a fire in it. And it was the age-old problem that we've had from the beginning, that even though we were under new circumstances and new situations, reportedly cigarette smoking was the cause, or not extinguishing the cigarette butt appropriately was reported to be the cause. Look, we want to recognize that everyone has done such a great job. You've faced the challenges that you've been presented with in these recent years and had to face some new challenges along the way. But we also know that it's very, very important for us to recognize our responsibility, even under the new normal, in protecting ourselves and those that we support by focusing in on fire safety. Now, there are a whole bunch of possibilities as far as some of the causes of why we find ourselves falling short in a few areas. It could be manpower challenges, overtime, maybe covering multiple locations and residences, right? We know that sometimes we have to work for a few hours here and then a few hours at another location. That can cause a lack of attention. People calling in sick, right? So manpower issues could be an issue. Could be some of the things that are contributing to us not documenting well or not even performing our drills on time as we're required to. There are COVID considerations. Our emergency response to COVID also created unique environments. We find ourselves having to operate with personal protective equipment on that maybe we weren't accustomed to in the past. We know that some of our houses have been on restriction and quarantine, so that can create unique issues as well and be possible, some of the possible causes as why we're falling short in a couple of areas. There's always distractions. It seems to be part of our daily endeavors now. Challenging in work environments, even home time, right? There always seems to be some kind of distractions for us. We operate in an environment sometimes where there seems to be a greater level of uncertainty. If we get to that circumstance, even the individuals that we serve and take care of on a daily basis recognize some of that unsettledness. The aha moment takes place when we recognize what's actually going on and we take steps to prevent those shortfalls. We all know there's an ever-present need to refresh our focus on fire safety as we deal with the challenges that we face every day. There's a strong need to remember those basics of fire safety that I talked about earlier in the introduction. Look, when we stop and think about it, no matter what's going on around us, the cause of fire really hasn't changed all that much. If you look at the illustration on the screen, you see what we call the fire tetrahedron. And that shows us the different components that are needed to have a fire and to sustain a fire. And many of you have seen this before and have heard this before, but maybe it's good for you to be refreshed on this. We know that we need heat, right? Heat actually contributes to the fire starting. We have to have oxygen, and that's all around us, right? We know that oxygen is in our air all around us. We also need not only the heat, but we need something to burn as well. When we get those three components together in the right mixture, we end up with a chemical chain reaction that causes the fire to be maintained, to be self-sustained, so to speak, and to continue to burn without interruption. One of the things that you may or may not know about this is that if we increase the heat, the fire burns more intensely. If we increase oxygen or even increase fuel, we find that under the right circumstances, those things contribute to the intensity of the fire as well as the fire itself. Once again, the greater amount of heat that we have, the greater amount of oxygen is consumed and fuel is burned quicker. Those contributing factors really maintain the fire and a chemical chain reaction, and that hasn't changed even though our outside circumstances and our life circumstances may have. Now, what many of you do know, and if you look at the screen once again at the illustration, you'll see that we can impact the fire itself by taking action, so to speak, against parts of the fire tetrahedron. So in other words, if we remove the heat from the fire, traditionally the fire goes out. Once again, if we have low levels of heat, traditionally the fire isn't as intense. The same thing with fuel. If we have a lower amount of fuel, the fire doesn't burn for as long. It isn't sustained, so to speak. Once again, if we can reduce the oxygen, which is very difficult because that's in the air all around us, we find that the fire will go out as well. One of the things that we try to do in fire prevention, right, is to keep the things that we can control away from each other and to reduce their size. Let me give you an example. If we have, maybe it's personal protective equipment, right? We know that most of those things are combustibles. And what I mean by that is they burn very readily. We know that in some of our residences, we have adult diapers and things of that nature that will burn very readily. We have papers and supplies and files, and all those things are different types of fuel. Well, if we store them properly and we reduce the amount that we have, we create a circumstance that cuts down on not only the chance of fire, but if fire should happen, it usually will happen in a lower capacity. Same thing with heat. We want to keep the heat away from anything that might burn. For instance, I wouldn't take a pile of papers or shopping bags or whatever that I have and place it right next to a heater or any heat creating device. I would keep that away from it. Also, I want to make sure that the heat isn't too high or too big because that will contribute to the fire as well. Now look, when we're looking about keeping these things separate or keeping them reduced, this isn't something that's in addition to our job. It's something that's part of it. It's something that we do as we perform our daily duties. Because we know that human behavior also contributes to this. And we need to take time to pay attention to the fire tetrahedron and how fire develops and how we can prevent the fire from developing by paying attention to different things. We have our own ideas of how we'll operate during an emergency. We have this idea, we believe that things will go the way we think they will. And that's not always the case. Are we paying attention closely in our day-to-day work as we come in and go to work? Is it a holiday? Do we have a lot of extra decorations around or combustible decorations that are put on the wall or the ceiling or around? Are we storing things extra? Are we purposing to focus on our drills, to meet our requirements? And this isn't something where we just look to check off a box, so to speak. We're doing it so that we can learn from it and be more prepared. You know, our pre-knowledge of our emergency evacuation plans and routes will help us if we know the needs of our individuals that we serve during regular circumstances and in emergencies. That will go a great distance to helping us. Because like I said, we know that human behavior is a factor in this. We have a tendency to believe, well, you know what? I can handle anything. No matter what happens, sometimes it can even get to the point where I'm ignoring different kinds of hazards that are happening at my work center or even in my own home. Sometimes we make mistakes. We overlook the obvious. Maybe we put the grill too close to the building or too close to the garage as we're cooking and barbecuing during the wonderful summer months. Sometimes we make mistakes in the kitchen or other areas where maybe we put something too close to a heat source. One way to overcome these mistakes or misperceptions or human behavior is to be prepared. It's to know what we're supposed to do no matter what the circumstances. And a lot of that goes back to our training. Look, we need to obtain and understand the training that we need to be prepared. And it's something that seems like an addition, but it really can be part of everything that we do on a daily basis. We need to know what we're supposed to do during a drill, during an evacuation. We even have circumstances where we're supposed to read our emergency evacuation plan and sign it every other month. Some places even have the requirement for you to read and sign monthly. Once again, that's not just something that we're doing to check off a requirement. It's something that we want to learn from, ask questions about. If I don't understand something and I don't know the needs of those around me, I might not perform as well as I possibly can. Practice helps us overcome common misperceptions. Once again, if we practice, we know that certain circumstances make it very difficult for us during emergency circumstances. We have this idea that we can do whatever we need to regardless of smoke and fire. We think that everything is going to be predictable during emergencies. You know, there's an old adage that says anything that can go wrong will go wrong, and traditionally that happens at the worst possible time. We think that everything will be the same as it is during drills when it comes to an active emergency, that everything will work out the way it's supposed to. And it's not that things will automatically go wrong, but there's a consideration here. We need to be aware. We need to get the training that makes us prepared for every eventuality. You know, do you know your fire safety systems? You know, as we go through and evaluate our emergency evacuation plan, have you recognized that there might be things in your building or where you work that are actually systems that help us? Have you ever seen a fire door? Do you realize that that's made, that when the alarm goes off, to compartmentalize the fire and stop it from spreading? It stops the spread of smoke. Maybe some of you have even seen the magnetic hold opens that are on some of our bedroom doors and other doors throughout our facilities. When the alarm activates, those doors are supposed to close to protect whoever's inside there from fire or to protect the rest of the facility from fire spreading throughout. Do you know the alarm systems? Do you know what the different sounds mean? Do you know what is a smoke alarm activation versus a carbon monoxide detector activation? Have you listened? Have you learned and recognized that usually when it's a fire alarm or smoke alarm going off and you hear 3 beeps, that's usually related to a smoke detector versus 4 beeps in a row when it comes to carbon monoxide? There's actually even new systems that will actually verbally tell you over a speaker system what the emergency really is. Do you know how to activate the systems in your facilities? Do you know how to pull a pull station? Do you know how to yell out and let everybody know that there's an emergency taking place? When you're going through these evacuation drills and fire drills and you're evacuating and looking at the plan, do you know how to identify things that aren't working properly? It's important that we do that ahead of time, so if one of those doors don't close, we can report that and get it fixed before an actual emergency were to take place. What's the alarm system communicating as it activates? Do you know if your facility has sprinklers? Do you know that sprinklers are very good and they help us in the case of an emergency? As a matter of fact, studies show that if a sprinkler system operates as it's intended and it's not blocked by anything, that's why we don't pile anything up near sprinkler heads or block them off or attach anything to a sprinkler head. Do you know that that either extinguishes or holds a fire in check? Over 98% of all the fires where it's operated properly, it has done that to help. Extinguishers, that's another thing. Do you know how to use your extinguishers? If you look up on the slide, you can see there's an acronym there. It's called PASS, P-A-S-S, and that helps us to remember how to use our fire extinguishers. We want to pull the pin out that's on the top right. We want to aim the nozzle at the base of the fire from about 5 to 8 feet away. We want to squeeze that handle and sweep side to side at the base of the fire. But if you've never done that before, if you've never learned how to do that before, you might not be prepared and ready in the case of a real emergency. Do you know where the safe area is? When you read and sign your emergency evacuation plan, have you asked, hey, where's the safe area? What are the alternate routes within our building and facility to get out? You know that part of our requirements when we practice our drills, we do our fire drills, is that we practice blocked exit drills. What that means is we simulate that the fire or emergency conditions have blocked our normal means of leaving the facility. And we have to be prepared and trained and know an alternate way out. Hey, when you're going through that evacuation plan, do you recognize where your responsibilities lay? What you're supposed to do? Are you assigned to a one-to-one and you're supposed to get that individual out? Are you responsible for clearing the upstairs if you have one or the main floor? Are you responsible to close doors on your way out? All these things should be defined within your emergency evacuation plan. And I say that because something as simple as notifying 911 can make all the difference in how fast help gets to you during an emergency. Who's supposed to do a head count and know who's present at the safe area as the fire resources respond and emergency resources respond? All these things are key to knowing and helping during an emergency. But once again, if we're not prepared to do these things, the outcome can be difficult at best. Look, we use this acronym in OPWDD. Many of you have heard it year after year in our fire safety training. It's called RACE 911. And each one of those letters represents something very specific. Rescue, right? That's the R. That's where we get somebody and remove them from the emergency area and get them away from it and hopefully all the way outside, if we can. There's A, that's the alarm portion. That's where we pull a pull station. We jump into action, so to speak, and let everybody know that there's an active emergency taking place. C, which is confining the fire. Studies have shown over and over again that this is one of the greatest things that you can do is close the doors on your way out. Confine the fire to the location that it started. Ultimately, our goal is to evacuate everyone, if at all possible, or to evacuate to a safe location, and we always call 911. Now you might say, well, Leon, that's obvious. Well, it seems obvious, but a lot of times when our alarm systems activate, people believe that the emergency resources are automatically on their way. And in many cases, they really are. But sometimes our systems fail, and when they do fail, we have actually had people outside during bad weather, during an emergency, and the emergency response personnel were not on the way. Always, always call 911 regardless. Whether you believe the alarm system is notified or not, call anyway. You know, we have specific roles as staff in our homes and where we work, right? And in the relationship that we have to our regular duties within our facilities. Who is responsible to do what? Do we understand and know our facility design? Once again, the number of exits. Do we know where they are? Do we know where the ramps are if there's someone who has a wheelchair? Do we know where the stairways are and alternate routes of evacuation? Do we know the needs of our individuals? This is very important. Do you know there's actually a spot in the emergency evacuation plan that outlines their specific needs and the specific configurations of our facilities? Some of our individuals have limitations and need additional help during emergencies, and this is something that we can know ahead of time and be prepared for. Once again, I mentioned extinguisher use. Do we know when to use it? Not only the PASS acronym, pull the pin, aim at the base of the fire, squeeze the handle and sweep side to side, but do you know that we should really only use that on smaller scale fires? Or if there's a fire that's blocking and stopping us from being able to effect rescue, right? If there's something between you and someone else that you need to rescue, a fire, you can use the extinguisher for that. Or maybe the only way out is blocked by fire. We would use the extinguisher for that. The issue with extinguishers is if we don't use them properly or we don't know how to use them properly and we can actually stop or hinder our ability to get out, right? Because we're wasting time trying to use the extinguishers, or we run out of time in general. So we want to be careful with using the extinguishers. We know where safe areas are, but is that communicated to everyone? Do new people know where that is? We got to consider seasonal impact as well. New York in the wintertime is a pretty terrible place to be if you're stuck outside. We want to make sure that we're doing the proper notifications, not only RACE 911, where we call 911, but we want to know that we want to call our OPWDD emergency operations line. We want to call them, and we want to notify our administrators on duty as well. Look, action starts well before an actual emergency. Training in good practices helps us respond appropriately. And before we move on completely, I want to emphasize one specific area. You know, all of the components of Race 911 are very important, but I want to focus on something a little bit more personal because it's something that directly applies to our homes as well. And the impact is great. It deals with confining the fire. If you look up on the screen, you can see that there's two photos. This is taken from a place that had a fire where both of these rooms were located next to each other. As you look at the picture, you can see that one room on the inside is really destroyed. There's a lot of smoke damage and fire damage in that room. If you look at the other one, you can see that, well, the outside of the door is burned and the wall is burned, but as you enter into the room, you can see that it's clear. Look, in OPWDD Fire Safety or Fire Safety Bureau, we care about you not only at work, but at your homes as well. And if there's one thing that I would love to persuade you to consider today after you finish this training, that as you go home, when you're at home at night or whether you're working at night or any time when people are sleeping, let's go ahead and close those doors. Studies have shown over and over again that it is the smoke and byproducts of combustion that actually we succumb to before the fire ever even gets to us. This is one way that you can go a great distance in protecting yourself and those that you love. So go ahead and make sure you close those doors, whether at work or at home, especially when people are sleeping. You know, hazards in our environment are key contributors to how fast fire spreads, how greatly fire spreads. We talked about that earlier, that if I have a great amount of fuel, that's going to intensify the fire. And we always want to make sure that we do our best to keep heat and things that can burn away from each other. The time for action, once again, is before an event even happens. Hazards, they fall into all different categories. We're going to talk about a few of them here today, but something that's as simple as paying attention to your work environment. Now, I'm going to define the place that this happened in. It's actually happened in multiple places. We've had situations where a surveyor would go into one of our facilities, one of our homes, and they find that there's no one in the kitchen. This one specific example is that there's no one in the kitchen, but somebody had turned on the burner for the electric stove, and that burner was glowing red hot, and no one was around. Now, I don't know what caused the person to leave that environment, but that's a very dangerous situation. I've personally gone into our facilities and see that someone was cooking and boiling hard-boiled eggs on the stove, and it was boiling rapidly and the heat was high, but no one was in the kitchen watching the food as it cooked. Look, this is very common for our types of facilities. We have a great deal of storage sometimes that gets built up, right? We want to make sure that we store things properly away from heat sources, and we want to keep the amount of storage limited. We know that our laundry rooms and our kitchens are so very important and require our attention. And I say that because that's where we have most of our problems. Well, the question remains, why do our laundry rooms and our kitchens create the most problems for us? And that's basically the fact that they bring all the components of the fire tetrahedron together. There's air, there's oxygen in our air that's around all. The laundry room and our kitchens traditionally have devices, whether it's washing machines, dishwashers, stoves. They bring the heat and fuel together. And that makes the perfect circumstance to create a fire. And it's not only that often in those environments we plug a lot of things in as well. That creates hazardous situations with electrical. Open flames can be created. We want to make sure that we don't put things that can burn next to things that are plugged in that create heat. All those things are considerations. We want to make sure that we use everything in accordance with the way that it was designed. Many times people use dishwashers to clean things that they were never intended to clean. Some people use ovens to do things that really don't have anything to do with cooking. We want to make sure that we use things in accordance with the instructions, like a toaster. We want to make sure that we use that appropriately. One of the most common things that we see misused are the power strips. You know what I'm talking about, those things that have multiple places that you can plug things into, and it seems to have a little red button on the side that we believe will shut off the electrical current, and it does for the most part. But those are only designed to use light electrical devices. They're not designed to be used with anything that has a motor, a heating element like a toaster or anything like that. Those power strips have actually melted and ignited on fire because they were overloaded with electrical current. So we want to make sure that we use things properly. Look, ask the tough questions. Is this the safest thing that we can be doing? Ask yourself that question as you do something. Am I bringing together components of the fire tetrahedron? Am I bringing heat and fuel together? Is there a better way that I could do this? Am I plugging something in directly to the wall that's required to, or am I using an extension cord in a place that I shouldn't? Look, the reason we have to ask these questions is because reality is we are functioning under a new normal in many ways, and we've mentioned that before. Take the time, ask the tough questions, and get help if you don't have the answers to those questions. Look, it's the new normal. It's not back to normal. We wonder if we will ever return back to the way things were before. Our current standing, it is telling us some things. Ask the question, how is your documentation? Look, if our documentation isn't accurate, if it isn't up to date, then that tells us that we're not performing at the levels that we really should be for our own safety and the safety of those that we serve. Once again, this isn't just going by and through some checklist just for the sake of doing it. We actually learn from these actions and we find things that are wrong and we take care of them before they become a major factor. How are we doing on our surveys? When we have our own people come through and check on us and make sure we're doing things the right way, when fire safety comes in or the Office for Fire Prevention and Control and they do their surveys, how are we doing? What are we getting back as far as feedback from them? And then what are we doing with the information that they tell us? Do we have the most current copy of our evacuation plan? And has everyone been trained on it? That's an important thing. Is it signed off every other month showing that we have been trained? Have we asked the tough questions during that training? Do we have an updated evaluation of all our individuals and what their needs are? People change. Maybe I have a medical condition that now has to be considered in our evacuation plan. Have we prepared ahead of time? Because once the emergency kicks off, it's just a little too late to be able to make those assessments. It's better to be prepared ahead of time. We even do things to make sure that we're ready, right? We have our monthly environmental checks where as a staff together, as part of our regular duties, we go around and make sure everything is okay. We make sure that our exits aren't blocked. We make sure that things are stored properly. We make sure that we take care of all our responsibilities as far as fire safety is concerned and keeping things neat and clean. Have we done our monthly fire extinguisher checks to make sure they're even in a condition to be used when we need those? Are we doing our emergency light checks and documenting that monthly as well? Look, the time to find out whether the light is going to work or not is not in the middle of the night when a fire emergency takes place. We can identify those things ahead of time and then we can report them to get things fixed. How are our actual responses going during our drills? And what are we doing about it? And how are things going when we have an actual evacuation? Are we talking about it afterwards and working through it to make sure that we're prepared as well as we can be? Sometimes we have to take steps to fix things. And as a team doing the new normal, there are all sorts of things that we can do to help each other out. Are we doing team trainings and talking about things? Or are we just having people one by one go through and do something? Are new employees trained? Maybe they're not even a new employee, but they're new to our location. Are we making sure they understand what their responsibilities are? Hey, after a drill or after an actual evacuation, are we taking time, 3 minutes, just to say, hey, how did things go? What did you see happen? Did things seem to work well with you? Those simple questions can go a long way. Is our documentation done completely and up to date? That tells us also how we performed. Are we doing our own self-inspections as part of our daily duties? It's just a matter of paying attention and looking around us. Talk to each other about things. During our inspections, communicate with each other. Those things will go a great distance in adjusting and making the changes necessary to ensure that we're as safe as we possibly are. What are we doing with what we find out? Maybe we do find out that one of those doors didn't close when the alarm went off as it was supposed to. Maybe we've noticed that there's a problem with the rug, it's a trip hazard or something of that nature. Maybe we recognize that one of the doors isn't closing all the way. Are we reporting those things so they can be fixed before an emergency happens? This is up to all of us and making sure that we're taking care of ourselves and the people that we serve. This is everyone's responsibility. You know, we're going to see a video in a few minutes here. It's going to go a long way to communicating the fact that we also need to know each other's responsibilities. It's not enough for me to simply know what I'm supposed to do. I mean, I need to know those things, don't get me wrong. But if something happens, I need to be able to adjust and do what you do during the emergency or vice versa. You know, you're not in this on your own. And it is kind of confusing sometimes, and sometimes there are questions, but you're not there by yourself. Look, I want to make very, very clear that OPWDD has a fire safety bureau, and these people are dedicated to giving you all the information that you need to make you most successful. Our goal is to protect you and the individuals that we serve on a daily basis. This is our drive and our purpose. The names that you see up on the screen, those are people that are assigned to the different regions, and there is always someone assigned to help you. Don't be afraid to reach out to them. Don't be afraid to ask tough questions of them. As you go through and you practice, as you find difficulties, as you observe or don't understand how to do things, reach out to these people. They will be more than willing to help you at any point. So what we want to do now is we want to take a couple of minutes and we want to get back to basics. And what I say by that, and what I mean by that is we're going to jump back to, well, it was actually published in 2013, one of the first rollouts of fire safety refresher training. There was an interview of people who had been through an emergency at one of our facilities. Now, the video you're going to see is going to have multiple pictures from different types of emergencies, but the audible part of it, the talking, the interview was conducted with workers in one of our houses specifically, and what they encountered. And I want you to listen closely to the things that they say, and we're going to review those afterwards. So here is that video now.
My name is Alicia. I work in a state facility.
Hi, my name is Kim, and I work in one of the state-operated IRAs.
Hi, my name is Melissa. I work at a state-operated IRA.
It was just a regular day. We come, the regular routine in the house. Everything was normal. nothing unusual. We sat down about approximately about 7:30 a.m. While we did the report, and we looked, and there was a smoke coming out from the registers.
This huge amount of black, thick smoke.
Everybody just instant reaction. I just yelled fire, and everybody just jumped. We have 12 individuals in the house, and 7 was on the front room, program room, when we were doing the report. 4 individuals in the back, in bed.
We then sounded the alarm and started evacuating people from the house. As we went through, we made sure to close all the doors behind us to confine the fire.
Everyone worked so together through many years of training and doing actual evacuation. I think that helped everyone doing the right thing. And the fire alarm come out, the doors are closed. And I did, in my head as we were going out, I remembered talking to another staff, John, to pull the alarms.
We then brought individuals out as we went along. We took blankets with us because it was very cold out that day.
I was the last one out with an individual grabbing the oxygen, running out. And when I look back, our program area is really a large room. And just in a few seconds, the whole room was just filled with dark gray smoke. And it was probably about 4 feet from the floors that you could actually see the light.
We had got the individuals in the front of the house out. We had put blankets on them. We took them to the rear of the house over in the parking lot, which is the meeting place. And then myself and Julie attempted to go back in after we got outside because we knew there were 4 more individuals in the back that were still in bed. We tried twice to get through the back door. We couldn't. We were coughing and gagging. And in the meantime, one of the other girls was coming out. Everybody except one, the one we were trying to get, the individual that was in bed, which her door had been shut just to defend in place. Nicole went back and she got down on her knees and crawled and got to the room and got the individual out. And we're in the parking lot.
It was just such a relief and exhausting, and actually we're proud that we did get everybody out. So we lived across another IRA, which we did call over there if they could come and help them, if because it was a very cold day. And just looking across from the road and seeing the response from another IRA to come and give us the help with our individuals, it was a very relief.
You know, as you listened to that video, I hope you were able to pull out some of the core lessons and some of the things that we've talked about here. And here we are in 2022, and this was, the event took place, I believe, in 2012. Here we are so many years ahead of that, and actually the lessons learned are timeless. This back to basics isn't something that's really changed when it comes to fire safety. And no matter what we face, we recognize that every fire emergency is a new normal. You know, if you listen to them give their explanations of what took place, you recognize that since that fire, they were in a new normal. Their lives have been changed forever. And if you listen to some of the things that they said, you recognize that things like their training, they said that years and years of training caused them to spring into action. They knew what to do. They had prepared for it. But there are many things that happen during an emergency that they have no control over. If you remember, they mentioned trying to get in the back, but the fire had spread so far, and they were coughing and they were gagging, trying to make access. What we didn't realize is that someone else was following the evacuation plan and actually gone in and rescued everyone out of the facility that they had concern over. Someone had taken care of their responsibilities and gotten them out. You know, one of the things that I find so encouraging and so enlightening about this interview is when they say how proud they were for getting everyone out. And you can't guarantee that things will go perfect every time. But if you listen to what they said, even the one lady said she had presence of mind to close the doors as she was leaving. She had presence of mind to tell John to make sure that he had hit the alarm activation so everyone would know. They had circumstances that they hadn't paid attention to where they had to have blankets on the ready because it was so cold outside as they evacuated. There were so many things in this story that we've talked about even here in this training. And like I said before, there are unexpected things that happen. And if you listen to the way they spoke, it didn't change their fears or the difficulties that they faced during the emergency. But what it did is it gave them a foundation to operate from. They took action based on what they knew. They knew where the evacuation routes were. They knew where the safe area was. They even knew where to call to get help with the IRA that was across the street. Once again, although we can't control all the circumstances, a fire event is a new normal, and that getting back to basics is a great place for us to be before something happens. Look, our training, our documentation, our discussions, our questions, and our preparation will go great distances to ensure that we're as ready as we possibly can be for sometimes something that may be inevitable. Remember, we always want to do our best to keep those components of the fire tetrahedron separate so we don't have the things that can burn in contact with heat sources. Remember also always that it is our laundry rooms and our kitchens predominantly that bring those factors together. Once again, I want to illustrate that you are not in this by yourself. We have trained professionals that are dedicated in our Fire Safety Bureau. Once again, those are your fire safety representatives. Please feel free to reach out to them. Invite them into the discussions you have with your trainings. Invite them into the questions that you have to solve problems, and they will be there ready to help you so you can prepare ahead of time for any new normal. Once again, my name is Leon, and on behalf of the OPWDD Fire Safety Bureau, thank you for attending your training this year, and we look forward to working with you in the future. Have a great day, and we can't wait until we see you again.